Runaway Ralph by Beverly Cleary. Chapter 1. Ralph Hears a Distant Bugle. The small brown mouse named Ralph, who was hiding under the grandfather clock, did not have much longer to wait before he could ride his motorcycle. The clock had struck 8 already, and then 8:30. Ralph was the only mouse in the Mountain View Inn, a rundown hotel in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, who owned a motorcycle. It was a mouse-sized red motorcycle, a present from a boy named Keith who had been a guest in room 215 over the 4th of July weekend. Ralph was proud of his motorcycle, but his brother and sisters said he was selfish. "I am not," said Ralph. "Keith gave the motorcycle to me." That evening, while Ralph waited under the clock and watched the television set across the lobby, a man and a woman followed by a medium-sized boy walked into the hotel. They had a rumpled look of people who had driven many miles that day. The boy was wearing jeans, cowboy boots, and a white t-shirt with the words Happy Acres Camp stenciled across the front. Ralph observed the boy with interest. He was the right kind of boy, a boy sure to like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Since the day Keith had left the hotel, Ralph had longed for crumbs of peanut butter and jelly sandwich. A grating, grinding noise came from the works of the grandfather clock. Ralph clapped his paws over his ears. The clock grumbled and groaned and managed to strike the hour. 9 o'clock. The time almost had come. The stroke of 9 was followed by the slow, sad notes of music that lingered and died mysteriously in the distance every night at this time. "Did you hear that?" the man asked the boy. It was the bugle at camp playing taps. "So that's what that music is," thought Ralph, who had puzzled over those notes all summer. When the boy did not answer, his mother said, "Come on, Garf, cheer up. You're going to have a lot of fun at camp." "Maybe," answered Garf, "but I doubt it." The father looked annoyed. "You won't have any fun if you take that attitude," he said, and went to the desk to inquire about a room with an extra cot for the night. Ralph could not understand the boy's behavior. He had often heard the young guests wearing the same kind of white t-shirt speak of a place called camp. But unlike this boy, they always sounded eager and excited about going there. Ralph did not know exactly what a camp was, but since medium-sized boys and girls went there, he thought it must be a place where people ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The desk clerk summoned old Matt, the elderly bellboy and hotel handyman, to show the family to their room. As Matt picked up their suitcases and led the way to the elevator, he said to Garf, "Well, young fellow, what are you going to have for breakfast tomorrow? Apple pie or chocolate cake?" Matt, who was not always popular with parents, was always liked by children. The boy smiled faintly at Matt's joke as he followed the old man into the elevator. What that boy needs is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, thought Ralph. When Matt returned to the lobby, Ralph watched him go out onto the hotel porch, where he stood for a few minutes among the empty rocking chairs for his nightly look at the stars before he retired for the night. The night clerk, a college student hired for the summer, came on duty and settled down on a couch to read a thick book. Ralph's time almost had come. Sure enough, the clerk read a few pages and then lay down the couch with his book face down on his chest and closed his eyes. Ralph was free for the night. He darted under the television set where he had hidden his motorcycle and the crash helmet that Keith had made from a half a ping pong lined with thistledown. He already had polished the chrome on his motorcycle by licking his paws and rubbing them all over the dull spots. Now he set his crash helmet on his head, snapped the rubber band under his chin to hold it in place, and taking care to keep his tail out of the spokes, mounted his motorcycle. Next, he inhaled deeply and exhaling with a sound, the only sound that will make a miniature motorcycle go, sped out from under the television set and across the carpet. Ralph rode across the lobby and into the hall. Up and down the hall zoomed Ralph, and the joy of speed made up for the long hours of hiding in dusty corners waiting for the night to come. Up and down the hall rode Ralph until he was too tired to take another big breath. Then he parked his motorcycle in a shadowy corner, hung his crash helmet on the handlebars, and flattening himself slipped under a door into his favorite room in the inn. It was a stuffy room, never very light even in the daylight, and locked when the last person left it at night. It was furnished with small tables and a row of high stools. The room was Ralph's favorite because he always could find peanuts on the floor, sometimes popcorn, and once in a great while a stuffed olive. Tonight he gobbled his fill of peanuts, wishing he had a little grape jelly to go with them, and managed, in spite of being somewhat fatter than when he had entered, to squeeze out again. Daredevil Ralph rode perilously close to the dangling hand of the night clerk sleeping on the couch before he tore the length of the hall. Ralph was exhilarated by the speed, danger, and his own daring. Back to the lobby. As Ralph paused to take another deep breath, his sharp ears caught the approaching squeaks of his little brothers and sisters and cousins, who rarely ventured into the lobby because they were afraid of the stuffed deer heads on the walls and the stuffed owl on the mantelpiece of the stone fireplace. Drat, swore Ralph softly to himself. Ralph was in the process of taking a deep breath so he could make a fast getaway when his mother and Uncle Lester scurried from under a chair in front of him. Ralph's deep breath came out in a poof, and his motorcycle stopped. "Ralph," said Uncle Lester, "it is time we had a talk." Ralph did not answer. He did not want to talk. Neither did he want to listen, but he knew that he could not avoid his uncle's lecture. He only hoped it would end before the little mice managed to get down the stairs. "You can't go on living like this," said Uncle Lester, running around the lobby, watching television all day and tearing around on that motorcycle all night. "Yes," agreed Ralph's mother, a most fearful mouse whose whiskers trembled constantly with fright. She was afraid of people, vacuum cleaners, owls, cats, traps, and poison grain. She quivered at the slightest sound. Ralph stared at the carpet. "Look at you," said Uncle Lester, "lint all over your whiskers." Ralph brushed at his whiskers with one paw. "And you're getting fat from eating peanuts you pick up in that place," continued Uncle Lester. "A bar is no place for a young mouse." "You will fall in with the evil companions," said his mother. "They will lead you into trouble." "Nobody can lead me any place," said Ralph, "because I can go faster on my bike." By now the little brothers and sisters and cousins had gathered to listen, wide-eyed with interest and pleasure. One cousin, braver than the rest, said, "He thinks he's big, calling a motorcycle a bike." "Ralph, you are sure to break your neck if you keep riding that thing," said his mother. "You said I could ride it," said Ralph sullenly. "You said I could if I wore my crash helmet and kept both paws on the handlebars." "I know," admitted his mother with a sigh. "I can't imagine what I was thinking of." The grandfather clock began to grind and groan. All of Ralph's family was alert, and when the clock began to strike, they disappeared under chairs and behind draperies, all except Uncle Lester, and even he looked nervous. "This is no life for a growing mouse," said Uncle Lester. "It is time you moved back upstairs to the mouse nest and helped lay in supplies for the lean months between summer and the ski season. You know nobody comes to this old hotel to spill crumbs as long as there is a vacant room in one of those new motels out on the highway." The clock finished striking midnight, and Ralph's relatives crept out of their hiding places. "He won't," said one of the bigger little cousins. "He won't because he's selfish." "You keep out of this," said Ralph. He is. He's just plain selfish," squeaked the little brothers and sisters and cousins. The night clerk stirred in his sleep, and all the mice froze into silence until the sound of snores came from the couch. "All hotel mice know they are safe from people who are snoring," the argument continued. "He keeps everything for himself," complained a little brother. "That's right," agreed another. "He never gives any of us a ride on his motorcycle." "Now, Ralph," said his mother, "it wouldn't hurt you to give the little mice a ride once in a while." "I thought you said motorcycle riding was dangerous," Ralph reminded his mother. "That's no way to talk to your mother," said Uncle Lester. "You don't have to speed. You can push your young relatives up and down the hall." "Push them!" squeaked Ralph in horror. "Push little mice up and down the hall on this beautiful motorcycle with its plastic seat and its pair of shining chromium mufflers? What a shocking idea! A motorcycle was not a kiddie car. "Now, Ralph, sharing your motorcycle won't hurt you one bit," said his mother. "Don't look so sulky." Me first, shrilled the little mice, pushing and shoving. "Ralph, get that look off your face." Uncle Lester looked so stern that Ralph knew there was no way out. "Even the girls?" he asked. "Of course," said his mother. "Quiet, children, or you will wake up the night clerk." Ralph wished the little mice would wake up the night clerk so he would have an excuse for hiding his motorcycle. However, his young relatives, who were in Ralph's opinion a fearful bunch, were silenced, and there was nothing for Ralph to do but boost the nearest little one up onto the seat of the motorcycle. "Give me the crash helmet," demanded the passenger. "What are you waiting for?" asked Uncle Lester. "Let him wear it." Ralph moved his treasured helmet, placed it on the head of the small passenger, and wheeled the odd little mouse down the hall and back. "More, more," demanded the passenger. "You had your turn," Ralph spoke shortly as he looked with distaste at his young relatives scrambling all over one another in their eagerness to be next. There were so many of them. Pushing them up and down the hall would take him all night. "Come on," he said crossly to his nearest cousin as he clapped the crash helmet on his head and boosted him onto the plastic seat. "Let's get it over with." "Faster," demanded the cousin. "I want to go faster." "You be quiet," said Ralph. "You wanted a ride and you're getting it." Ralph soon found that pushing the motorcycle along the bare floor at the edge of the hall was easier than pushing it through the carpet. Up and down the hall he trudged with one little mouse after another, while he longed to be riding off into the kitchen where the linoleum made the best speedway in the hotel. Up and down the hall plodded Ralph with brothers, sisters, and cousins. He grew more and more rebellious as the stars outside the hotel grew dim above the pine trees. The motorcycle was his. It was given to him by a boy to ride, not to use as a kiddie car for a lot of wiggly, squirmy little mice. A motorcycle was not a toy. Why couldn't his mother and Uncle Lester understand? Because they were too old to understand. Too old and too timid. That was why. Ralph felt sorry for himself, caught as he was between two generations of mice. Most of his own litter had died from eating poisoned grain, put out by a particularly disagreeable cook. There was the older generation of mice who worried about safety and being able to scrounge enough crumbs to tide them over till the lean months between the summer seasons and ski season. Then there was the younger generation of silly little mice who were always busy wiggling, climbing all over one another, and gobbling up crumbs as fast as they were brought to the mouse nest. Nobody understood Ralph, which was a whole trouble. Night was fading, and the chirp of a bird out in the pines told Ralph that the hotel was about to come to life. The night clerk soon would awaken and close his book, and the cook soon would be rattling pans in the kitchen. A cousin, braver than most, came running down the hall where Ralph was wearily pushing the motorcycle. "You aren't fair," he scolded. "You've given him 3 rides, and some of the others 2, and me only 1. Ralph stopped in his tracks. "Do you mean to stand there and tell me some of you have had more than 1 ride?" "Yes," was the answer. "And I'm going to tell Uncle Lester on you. Then you'll really catch it." Ralph was too angry to squeak. He snatched his helmet from the head of his passenger, tipped him off onto the floor, and mounted his motorcycle while taking a deep breath. Boom! Ralph shot down the hall into the lobby. The first pale rays of morning sun filtered through the pines, which now were filled with joyously chirping birds. The night clerk stirred. All the little mice looked frightened and scuttled towards the stairs and the safety of their nests of shredded Kleenex. The night clerk sat up, yawned, stretched, and scratched his chest, giving Ralph just enough time to garage his motorcycle in the dark corner under the television set before the last shadow of night faded from the old hotel. Ready to rest and filled with bitter thoughts, Ralph set his crash helmet on the dusty carpet and sat down with his back resting against the front wheel of his motorcycle. The grown-up mice should not make him use his beautiful motorcycle as a toy to amuse a lot of squirmy, ungrateful little relatives who were growing up and soon would insist on riding by themselves. And Uncle Lester would insist that Ralph let them. Well, he wouldn't. Never again would he use his motorcycle as a toy. He did not care what Uncle Lester or anyone said. Ralph did not want to grow up to be like a crumb-scrounging mouse like Uncle Lester. He did not want to settle down in a nest of shredded Kleenex behind the baseboards of the linen room. He wanted a life of speed and danger and excitement. He wanted to be free to do as he pleased and go when he pleased on his shiny red motorcycle. The clock struck 6, and in the distance, Ralph heard the notes of the distant bugle, this time lively notes that seemed a summons to excitement and adventure. And now that he knew where those notes came from, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Before the notes had died away, Ralph heard the laughter and shouts of a medium-sized boy and girl who must be about the same age as Keith, the boy who had understood mice and who had given Ralph the motorcycle. The rousing notes of the bugle and the laughter and shouting increased the feeling of rebellion within Ralph. As the last strains of the bugle call hovered in the clear mountain air, Ralph made up his mind. He knew now what he was going to do. He was going to run away.
Chapter 2. The Open Road. Too excited to hide under the grandfather clock where he could watch television, Ralph spent the day beside his motorcycle under the television set, watching life in the lobby and waiting for night to come. Luggage was set down with a thump. Guests complained that there were not enough towels in their rooms, and when the guests had gone, the desk clerk said to Matt, "What do they think this is, the Waldorf?" Ralph listened as the manager of the hotel spoke sharply to the housekeeper about the cigarette ashes on the carpet. The housekeeper spoke even more sharply to the maid, who ran the vacuum cleaner so carelessly that Ralph was not even frightened. He was too busy thinking of the night that lay ahead. When the boy called Garf clumped across the lobby in his new cowboy boots on his way to Happy Acres Camp, Ralph longed to follow him out the front door and down the steps. Late in the afternoon, new guests straggled into the hotel. Some looked at the shabby furniture and dusty deer heads and left. Others, too tired from driving to look further, stayed. When the television set was turned on, Ralph polished the chrome on his motorcycle with his paws. When the set was silent, he napped, too excited to sleep soundly. At last, the bugle in the distance played its slow, sad notes, and old Matt left the front door open as he went out on the porch to look at the stars. The moment had come. Ralph snapped his crash helmet in place. He grasped the handlebars and pushed his motorcycle out from its hiding place, avoiding the attention of the night clerk by guiding it along the edge of the baseboard to the front door. On the porch, he mounted with a vigorous rode across the cracked concrete to Matt's feet at the top of the steps. "Hi," said Ralph, who was able to talk to animals and to any human being who loved speed and motorcycles and who understood that the only way to make a miniature motorcycle go was to make a sputtering noise that sounded like a big motorcycle. "Why, hello there, young fellow," said Matt. "Just where do you think you are going?" "I'm running away," said Ralph, "on my motorcycle." "You don't say!" exclaimed Matt. "Yes, I've had enough of this place," said Ralph. "I'm going someplace where I can be free." "You want to get away from your family?" said Matt, grasping the situation at once. "You want to be independent?" "That's right," said Ralph. "I'm tired of being bossed around by my mother and Uncle Lester. I'm fed up with my pesky little brothers and sisters and cousins. I don't want to grow up to be another crumb-scrounging mouse. I want adventure and excitement, and I'm going to ride off on my motorcycle to find it." "Sounds good," observed Matt. "I wish I could do the same. Just ride off into the night on a motorcycle. I always wanted a motorcycle, but I could never afford one. When I was young, I had to help my folks, and then I had a family of my own to take care of. Now that my family has grown up and gone away, I'm too old for a motorcycle." The mouse and the man were silent a moment before Ralph said, "Well, I guess I'd better be going." "So long," said Matt. "Good luck. I'm going to miss you. It always cheered me up to see you tearing around the halls like a little daredevil. Made the suitcases seem lighter somehow." With that parting comment, he turned and started back toward the door of the hotel. "Hey, wait!" squeaked Ralph. Matt turned. "You want something?" For some reason, Ralph hesitated before he said, "I was wondering if you could lift my motorcycle down the steps for me." "And I was wondering how you were going to manage," remarked Matt, but he did not move to help Ralph. I'd like to get started," said Ralph. I have a long way to go tonight." "Sorry, I can't help you out," said Matt. Ralph was astounded. For a grown-up human being, Matt had always been cooperative. "How come?" he demanded. "If I lifted your motorcycle down the steps, you would be depending on me," said Matt. "And depending on others is not being independent." Ralph was bewildered. But how am I going to get my motorcycle down the steps without breaking it? I don't know, admitted Matt. I just hope I don't have to come out here in the morning and sweep up pieces of a red motorcycle. He turned then and went back into the hotel, closing the door behind him. Well, how do you like that? Said Ralph to himself. And all the time I thought he was my friend. Off in the distance, an owl hooted. The night suddenly seemed vast, and a mouse a very small creature indeed. The row of empty chairs rocking in the breeze made Ralph nervous. He could not get over the feeling there were unseen people sitting in them, ghosts who might at any moment chase him down and steal his motorcycle. He looked down at the 3 concrete steps and the curve of the driveway below them. His motorcycle was a good sturdy vehicle, but it would never survive 3 bounces on concrete. It would be smashed to bits. Bits for Matt to sweep up in the morning. Suddenly, Ralph was angry. He was furious at the way his old friend had treated him. He would show Matt that he could manage without help. Matt would come out in the morning expecting to find Ralph waiting to be let in, but Ralph would fool him. He wouldn't be waiting, and there wouldn't be any broken motorcycle at the foot of the steps either. Ralph set about finding a solution to his problem. He looked at the ghostly rocking chairs, the cracked concrete porch, the steps, and the asphalt driveway below. Once Ralph had taken the trouble to look, the solution to getting his motorcycle down the steps seemed surprisingly easy. About 3 inches below the porch on either side of the steps was a sloping section of concrete, a sort of ramp intended as an edge to the steps. The 2 ramps were about 10 inches wide and each sloped down to a flat section. Below each flat section was a shrub that had been pruned into a somewhat lopsided ball of leaves. All Ralph had to do was ride his motorcycle over the edge, down the slope, and into the shrub, which would break his fall and let him slide gently through the leaves to the ground. The only problem was that terrifying 3-inch drop from the porch to the slanting concrete. But Ralph was sure that with a cool head and steady paws, he could manage. He would show old Matt a thing or two. Ralph wheeled his motorcycle back from the edge of the porch, but in line with one of the concrete ramps. High speed would be best, he decided. Speed fast enough to carry him over the edge without wobbling so that he would land on the ramp on both wheels. Ralph's heart was pounding as he mounted his motorcycle, but his head was cool and his paws steady on the handle grips. Ralph drew a deep breath. His paws tightened on the handle grips. He rode smoothly toward the edge of the porch. He held his breath as he shot out into space as he had planned. There was a sudden heart-shaking drop before the tires hit the ramp. At this point, everything went wrong. Before Ralph realized what was happening, the motorcycle shot down the ramp, which was worn smooth by the many children who had slid down it. Ralph flew into the air and fell upside down into the shrub. He lost his grip on the motorcycle and felt himself brushed by leaves and scratched by twigs until he came to rest wedged into the crotch of a small branch. His helmet had fallen off, one ear was scratched, and he was badly frightened. But he was not injured. When Ralph had caught his breath and his heart no longer pounded against his ribs, he boosted himself up so that he was sitting in the crotch of the twig. The shrub was not the leafy cushion he had expected. From his perch in the center, he could see that the leaves grew only at the tips of the twigs, and that the bush, which had looked soft and springy from the outside, was on the inside leafless and spiky with dead twigs. My motorcycle, thought Ralph frantically. Where is it? Then he saw it, far above his head, hanging on a twig by its back wheel. His helmet, however, had bounced to the ground. Ralph did the only thing he could do, and that was climb up to his motorcycle and start chewing. The twig that held the motorcycle had a dry and dusty taste, but Ralph chewed until it snapped and the motorcycle slid down to the crotch of the twig below. Ralph climbed down, and when he could not free the motorcycle with his paws, he started chewing once more. no little cousin was ever going to say to him, "What happened to your motorcycle, Ralph? Huh? What happened to your motorcycle?" Ralph chewed his motorcycle from one twig to the next, and the lower he went, the thicker the twigs became. By the time the motorcycle finally dropped to the ground beside the helmet, Ralph's jaw ached. He dragged the motorcycle across the weedy patch of lawn to the driveway and was about to mount when the door of the hotel unexpectedly opened, and old Matt, in pajamas and bathrobe, stepped out on the porch and looked around. "That little fellow must have managed to get his motorcycle down the steps somehow," Ralph heard Matt mutter to himself. "Now maybe I can get to sleep." "Guess I showed you," thought Ralph grimly, as he mounted his motorcycle and sped off down the open road, off into the dark, scary night. "So long, brothers, sisters, cousins. So long, Uncle Lester. So long, Matt." Ralph was on his way. Ralph bounced along the uneven driveway to the mountain highway, where he quickly discovered that one of the ribbons of concrete pressed smooth by passing tires made a good highway for a mouse. He then made an even more exciting discovery: gravity. With a good fast start, he could coast downhill with amazing speed. The halls of the Mountain View Inn were never like this. Ralph sped through a night that fulfilled his dreams of freedom. It was a night of danger and adventure. Once, when Ralph was frightened by the headlights of an approaching car, he swerved to the side of the road where he and his motorcycle were caught in the backdraft of the passing car and tumbled like old gum wrappers and tossed into the weeds. Afterward, Ralph was alert when he heard a car approaching and got off the road and clung to a weed until the car roared past. He was exhilarated by this test of his skill. Toward dawn, logging trucks began to rumble down the mountain, shaking the earth as they came. Ralph never had seen anything so terrifying as those great double-tired monsters with logs lashed to their truck beds, barreling down the center of the highway, and he knew the time had come to hide for the day. He ate some dusty weed seeds, drank dew, slept under a leaf, and started off once more at nightfall toward the sound of the bugle. Between cars and trucks, Ralph tore along down the highway through the shadows of the night. This ride was the freedom he had dreamed of, speed without effort. Once the thought crossed his mind that if he should ever want to return to the Mountain View Inn, he could never make it back up the mountain under his own power. What a silly thought. Why would he ever want to go back to the inn when he could travel this way? On the third night of Ralph's journey, as darkness faded and the pine trees gave way to scrub oak, Ralph found himself out in the open where there were no sheltering shadows. A milk truck rattled past on its way to the Mountain View Inn. Blackbirds greeted the dawn with bursts of gurgling song, and not far away a rooster crowed. A pheasant flew low across the road, startling Ralph and causing him to collide with a piece of gravel. The road, which now followed an irrigation ditch, had leveled off, and Ralph had to produce his own power. As Ralph putted along on his motorcycle, daylight made him uneasy. He was looking for a place to hide when the notes of the bugle, so close he felt as if they might shatter him, burst forth in the lively morning tune. Before they died away, laughter and shouts filled the air. Medium-sized boys and girls, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Ralph had reached his destination. Ralph wished old Matt could see him as he rode off the road and bounced onto a gravel lane that crossed a small bridge over the irrigation ditch. Ahead lay a number of low, weathered buildings surrounded by lawn and shaded by walnut trees. Boys and girls were washing their faces in wash basins set on benches. A big brown dog, barking furiously, came bounding toward Ralph, who stopped, frozen with terror. The dog stopped too, so suddenly he nearly sat down in the gravel. He recovered himself and approached, snuffling with his wet black nose. Ralph sat with his paws clutching his handle grips in fear while the horrible black nose sniffed him. "And just who do you think you are?" asked the dog. "Quiet, Sam!" yelled a boy. Mouse." Ralph felt very, very meek. Sam eyed Ralph with curiosity. Where did you get that motorcycle? He wanted to know. A boy gave it to me. Ralph was beginning to feel slightly braver, but only slightly. That big dog could gobble a mouse in one gulp. But not if I hang on to my motorcycle, thought Ralph, feeling that his courage had not deserted him entirely. A dog would not eat a motorcycle. No kidding, said Sam. A mouse-sized motorcycle. Where did you come from? The Mountain View Inn. That run-down place, said Sam. I'm not surprised the mice are deserting it. Where are you going? Well, here, I guess, said Ralph. I followed the sound of the bugle. I wanted to be near medium-sized children and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Sorry, said Sam, you can't come in here. I'm the watchdog for Happy Acres Camp, and it's my job to protect the camp. Aw, come on, said Ralph, who was beginning to see that Sam was not really a ferocious dog. I'm just a mouse. Sam looked uncomfortable. Obviously, he was a dog that liked to please everyone. I would let you in if I could, but my orders are to keep out anyone who doesn't belong here. Ralph hunched down on his motorcycle. Please, I'm just a teeny little brown mouse. Nobody would even notice me. Sam's honest brown face looked worried. No, he said at last. I can't let you in. I have my orders from Aunt Jill and Uncle Steve in the camp office. They're in charge here. I've had a long, hard trip, said Ralph. I'm tired and I'm hungry. Sam looked so worried that Ralph pressed his advantage. You know boys like mice. They would be glad to have me. Sam looked back toward a white building under the walnut trees. Then he looked down at Ralph. I tell you, I can't do it, he said. If I let you come in, I'd be breaking my orders. I'm already in trouble because a car came along in the middle of the night and dumped a box of kittens. It got away before I could rouse anybody. Kittens? Squeaked Ralph in horror. I have the worst time with kittens. Sam's voice was gloomy. People are always dumping kittens here because they know girls will beg their parents to let them take them home. Very many kittens? Asked Ralph, who was feeling nervous once more. Too many, said Sam. We already had 3 kittens that belonged here, and the other night 6 more were dumped. And once they're here, I'm not allowed to chase them. I tell you, it isn't fair. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's kittens. Silly little things with no sense of responsibility. Sam's trouble made Ralph feel cocky once more. If you're a watchdog, watch me, he said, and taking a deep breath, he shot between Sam's legs and out the other side before the surprised dog could turn around. Ralph swerved around a green walnut lying on the ground and into a patch of weeds beside a nearby building. Come back here, barked Sam. You aren't supposed to do that. He began to snuffle around in the weeds. Ralph had not expected to be snuffled for. He had thought that once he was inside the camp, Sam would give up. Sam growled and moved his nose around in the weeds like a doggy vacuum cleaner. Unable to ride, Ralph pushed his motorcycle farther back into the weeds. The wet black nose parted the stalks, but Ralph was saved by a gopher hole. He dragged his motorcycle into its shelter. Oh, no, you don't, growled Sam, and began to dig with his powerful front paws. Dirt began to fly. Pulling his motorcycle after him, Ralph waded farther back through the loose dirt into the gopher hole. Faster went the paws. Hey, everybody, Sam's after a gopher, a boy yelled, and Ralph could feel feet pounding on the ground overhead. Go get him, Sam, urged another boy. Sick him, Sam, everyone seemed to be saying at once. You're being mean to the gopher, protested a girl. Several girls' voices began to yell, Go, gopher, go! Faster and faster flew the paws with their strong toenails. Sam was panting now. Ralph pushed farther and farther back into the gopher run until a disagreeable voice ahead of him said, And where do you think you're going? Eek! Squeaked Ralph, face to face with the owner of the gopher run. He hastily pushed his motorcycle, which he had been pulling, ahead of him for protection. Beat it, said the gopher, squinting at Ralph. I didn't dig this tunnel for mice. The digging paws were coming closer. "Attaboy, Sam!" shouted the boys. "Go, Gopher, go!" shouted the girls. Even the gopher looked uneasy. "Please," pleaded Ralph, "save me from that beast." The gopher was more interested in saving himself. Already he was beginning to move farther down the run. "You can stay until that dog stops digging and no longer," he said, and fled off into the network of tunnels. Not far away, a bell clanged. "Breakfast! Chow time!" yelled the boys, and the feet that went pounding off in the direction of the bell shook the ground overhead. The paws stopped churning, but overhead Ralph could hear the sound of panting. Sam poked his fearsome snout into the gopher hole for one last sniff before he too trotted off for breakfast. "Whew!" gasped Ralph, leaning against his motorcycle. He had pictured camp as a place where boys would bring him peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Not this dark and dusty tunnel inhabited by a grouchy gopher.